What can life teach us about business?
And what can business teach us about life?
If we succeed in one, do we have to sacrifice the other?
I'm Sarah Armstrong.
And I'm Colt Brenner.
We met in the boardroom working as execs, but we've developed a unique friendship posing these and other philosophical questions to each other.
We bring a passion for continual learning and deep friendships to this podcast that contemplates living elevated lives.
While we have very different life experiences, we're also kindred spirits in the pursuit of knowledge and meaningful personal relationships.
Come with us as we challenge each other and our guests to think differently, be open to new perspectives, and embark on journeys of elevated lives. All right, here we go. Welcome to Elev8AF podcast episode number 004. The zero's in front of the 4 just to showcase how ambitious we are about this whole thing.
Yes, so committed. So committed.
All right, so we continue in our pursuit of topics that we believe will lead to an elevated life, both learning and sharing everything that we can along this journey. So right into the mission statement for this episode, the role that purpose plays in personal elevation. And this really flows from the comments that we got from Rob during our conversation last week. And one of the things that I remember he was talking about regarding you actually was that you brought 3 key things to the process of that mentor-student relationship, which fueled it and ultimately made it possible. And that was number 1, I think, was courage, and then energy, and then finally purpose, which is the one we're going to be looking to unpack here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about purpose and what that means to each of us and how that relates to your journey to pursue an elevated life.
Yeah, purpose. I mean, heading towards this episode, I find that purpose isn't easy to put a bow on. And thinking about it took me to all kinds of places, just sort of like it went everywhere from like super clear and crispy to very squishy and hard to like define, etc. But before I talk about my own views of it, I just kind of want to get your take, right? Like, so on a personal level, because I know there's organizational purpose and business purpose and the rest of the stuff, but let's talk here today on a personal level. What does purpose mean to you? Not what is it for you, but what does it mean to you?
Great question. And I think this is such a deep topic. We could spend multiple episodes just exploring this particular question.
Yeah.
Purpose for me is when you arrive in a place in your life where you can learn to question the societal boundaries or the things that you have been taught about what you want out of life. What is your definition of success? And when you have kind of reached that spot where you are comfortable questioning, why do I want this? Why do I pursue that? What does success mean for me? The emotional attachment that you have to certain tasks or achievements or material items, figuring out why do these things create energy in me, that's when you start to develop a sense of purpose. And I think it's that individual definition of success and how you want the world to experience you, and how are you, what's your legacy? What do people think about when they think about you? What are people going to think about after you're gone?
Yeah. And so I want to follow up on that just with this question. Do you find that it is a stable thing, a fluid thing, a changing, like what can you tell me about that?
I personally think it's very fluid. I think that if we allow ourselves to, again, this is a core principle of living an elevated life, is to allow your life experience to guide and shape you along the way. So if you establish purpose at 20 with no experience in marriage and professional achievement and raising children and all of those things that just alter our perspective so much as we go along our life, then I think you would be missing out on great opportunities to continually reshape your purpose. I do think that a journey of elevation as a result may get you more cemented in certain things, and they become more existential than tangible, such as I want to be a better friend right? I feel like I have a purpose around my personal board of directors, or I have a purpose to be this type of parent or this type of spouse
Yes.
versus I have a purpose to do this kind of work. I mean, what you do for a living is one thing. I think purpose is much more about how you live your life and how you interact with people than what you do.
Yes. Yeah. I share your thinking there. I've felt like purpose, if I was trying to define it, is going to be the central theme that drives you, that provides you like energy, cause,
Mhm.
reason, right? Um, Towards some kind of a defined outcome, right?
Mhm.
And I don't mean that it's a one and done finalized outcome, but that you're seeking to manifest something in your life or the lives of others. And I have found that I can either think about purpose in sort of a singular dimension, or I can think about it across many dimensions. I have an exercise that I do, which is like mind mapping life. I do this with myself and with others, where it's like you think of dimensions in life, right? So the relational dimension, the career dimension, your learning dimension, right? How you want to like expand your mind, your spiritual dimension, these types of things. Um, and you can think about purpose in each one of these, right? So, what kind
Mhm.
of life and family circumstance do you aim for as you commit energies in that direction, and the same thing in the career standpoint, etc. And sometimes you find that you can wrap it all up under a single theme, which is what we like to do mentally, right? Like we like stories, we like movies, we like to have a sense of, oh, this all means that, and sometimes you can't really do
Mhm.
that. And then it's also the next dimension that I think about is the dimension of right now, like the here and the now kind of dimension versus what can you project that happens over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, several years, or a lifetime. And I think that purpose has meaning in the context of different time frames in very different ways.
Mhm.
Ultimately, in any present given moment, to richly experience the present given moment to me is like that's where it is. That's what it's about. Whatever's happening now, to be with it richly. Um, but the thing that you're involved in now presumably came about from some kind of plan. You and I scheduled this call, and that
Right.
plan hopefully ties to some sense of my personal purpose.
I agree with all of that. And I would say it brings to mind for me the TED talk that I did a couple of years ago, where I talked about being on an airplane next to this woman who was suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and how leadership to me in that moment was laying aside what my personal needs were,
Mm.
my need to disengage, whatever it was, have quiet time, whatever, and engage her and meet her where she was in her moment of suffering, because who I wanted to be, what I believe is my purpose, is to be a leader at all times in all ways. Therefore, when you're sitting next to someone in that individual with that individual need, your purpose in that moment is to help lead them and guide them through whatever suffering they're suffering from. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, we talked earlier today about, and you shared with me the TED talk, the lies our culture tells us about
Yes.
what matters.
Yes.
And I love that TED talk. I'm going to listen to it regularly because it's such a great reminder. But he talks about the weavers of the world and how they lift people up. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's such an important component of purpose, is who are you called to lift up? Sometimes it's situational, like we were just describing. Sometimes it's much more global. And he goes on to talk about people that saw needs in larger communities, and they wove together the fabric that created a way to lift up large quantities of people at once. But I think that's such a key component to purpose.
So then, did you actually just lay out your own current purpose? And if you did, can you say it again?
Um, I think at the very highest level, I feel compelled. I feel like my purpose is to lead and guide people, because I have a gift in meeting people where they are, and with no judgment, and with empathy and compassion. That's something that is very, very important to me. And I'm not perfect at it. I grow in those skills every day. And I have dark places and valleys just like everybody else because I'm human. But I do believe strongly that that is my purpose at the highest level. I think that that manifests itself very differently in certain circumstances. For example, right now, you may be aware that I'm thinking about, what do I want to do next from a career perspective?
Yeah, sure.
One of the elements as I'm evaluating those opportunities is how will this allow me to achieve my purpose? My
Right.
purpose in leading and guiding people, my purpose in doing something interesting to help the healthcare space, revenue cycle space, whatever those things are. But that achievement of purpose is a core component of me evaluating these opportunities. I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, salary and all of those things would have been much, much higher on the list, but
Yeah.
they have been replaced over time. They're much, much farther down.
Alignment with your own sense of purpose. You have a strong sense of purpose. And I guess what I'm curious about is, how do you arrive? How did you arrive at your own, what is clearly a strong sense of your own purpose?
Wow. I think you heard a little bit about that from Rob
Yep.
and
Yep.
how he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and he taught
Hmm.
me how to refine it and perfect it and continually work on it. There are a lot of things that have been poured into this as a vessel, right? If I think of myself as just a vessel where I'm constantly evaluating and learning and taking in inputs. I think about the War of Art as an example.
Yeah.
Um,
Great. Yes.
right. So you and I both read this book called The War of Art. It's been a while that we read it, but it talks about the resistance and how we as humans are naturally inclined to resist our own greatness, to resist our own skills and talents. And the root of that resistance is fear. And my journey has been really about understanding those voices in my head, who they belong to, when to take action on them, when to ignore them, to seek counsel when I feel like I can't really get clarity. Those are all the ways. It's not, when you ask me, how did I get here? It's not one thing. It is a series of
Yeah.
so many things. So many people have helped me on this journey. And as I think about who I've been to a lot of those people, what makes our bond special, that's kind of how I landed on this is my purpose.
So what I find fascinating about that is that you're talking about what sounds like a combination of something that you find both fulfilling, right? Rewarding, I'll call it rewarding maybe, and
Mm-hmm.
also an area of fear, right? So these really feel like conflicting signposts, right? If we're using them as guides to how do I discover my purpose, there is an element of fear. I totally am in agreement with you. There's also an element of, this is a thing that I find deeply rewarding and fulfilling. Um, you know, but it's like those things occurring simultaneously. I am in a state of like fear, resistance is happening, and there's also the sense of how rewarding I find this, right? So how do you
Well,
reconcile these sort of conflicting signposts?
I think they're in sequence. And I think
Uh-huh.
part of what gives me such a sense of fulfillment is that I have not mastered, but I have definitely grown my skill in
Yeah.
pushing through fear and
Yeah.
finding fulfillment in just doing that act. Right. And I push through fear, not for my own benefit, but other people inspire me to push through my fear. And I see how rewarding that is to people in my life. And that is what is fulfilling about it.
Wow.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
It totally does. Yeah, it totally does.
Yeah. So it's not the absence of fear, it is recognizing how fear is manifesting itself in that moment, how to recognize it, push past it, and then find it in your rearview mirror so that the next time you're faster at
Yep.
identifying it, you understand it more and maybe have less fear.
Yeah, and I do find that I can use I would call it the fuel that I gain in rewarding experiences that are aligned with my purpose to drive me through
Mm-hmm.
meeting fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that sense of being buoyed, right? And resilience that I get from that was good. I like that. I feel good about that. And then looking into the next area of resistance, I can get moved through that because of how positive the experiences have been. You have to, that's a feedback loop you need to build on, right? So you get a small sense of reward, gives you a small bit of fuel to use to push into resistance. And then the next time it should be bigger. And sometimes it gets smaller, but they're generally up and to the right kind of thing.
Yeah, a practical application of that. I was on a panel this summer at a conference, and we were talking about what everyone was talking about this summer, which is the work from home and the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic and are people going back to the office and all of these things. And one of the things that I talked about was for a long time, and this was a revenue cycle topic, we were afraid to allow large groups of people to work from home because we were afraid of loss of productivity, right?
Right.
And so we hired people, we trained people, and we led and managed our people through a certain lens for decades.
Sure. Yeah.
And then because we were afraid of if we did this or that, what would the outcome be? And obviously, we were forced to send everyone home, revenue cycle and industries, across the world.
Yep.
And my thinking on that I shared with the panel was that should have taught us as a collective that we can push through the things that we're afraid of and be okay on the other side, that we were forced to. Then we should sit back and go, okay, what else have we been afraid to do? And how can we push through that?
Yeah.
And I think that level of innovation is still lacking in some regard. But I think that fear, learning how to push past that and seeing the tangible results should inform us and help us be less fearful as we go forward.
Yeah. And for even small moves can feel very resistive, right? Like,
yeah,
ooh, that's kind of a spooky thing. But I understand what you're saying about using that as signposts that you're heading in the right direction.
Well, I'm going to flip the question back to you, of course, is what you asked me about my purpose. Can you talk about your own purpose and how you arrived at some of those conclusions?
Sure. Like I said, it's been a journey just thinking about like defining purpose. And as a marketer, really to just like take all the fluff, dude. Just take the fluff off of what you really find is your actual own purpose instead of just what sounds good in a soundbite about what you're out trying to accomplish in life. And I know that you've heard me say that I do believe the living of a life is the greatest form of art, right? That is like everyone is an artist of life, and your life is your art. And then I come to the question from that thinking, the first question that emerges around purpose is, well, what is the purpose of art? And it can be a lot of things. So, but you could think about what is the purpose, if you were to put it that way, of dancing? What's the purpose of singing or making music? And I think that if I'm really going to peel it all the way back to just the pure core of what I think the purpose of my life is, I think it's probably a purpose that I would suggest may even be the purpose of everyone's life, but I'll stick to myself, is this idea of creating an expression, like that my life is an expression of art, and that I'm here to use the moments, both the time and my life energy, to create an artwork. And it's like, I'm not trying to make the Michelangelo here, but I am aware of this as a mode of art. And if you think about like, okay, then what that does for me is it gives me a sense of like ownership, right? So you start to make decisions, you start to ask questions about, okay, well, if my life, and it really ultimately ends up in the same place that you were talking about, begin with the end in mind. And what do I want people to think about me beyond my years, like when I'm gone, and what kind of an impression do I hope to have made? These are the questions of an artist. That's really how I think about it. So in the most general sense, I am here just expressing the art of my own life. And I do find fluidity in terms of how I want my energies to flow, right, in terms of creating an impact and having what would be more classically thought of as a purpose. And now I go to my own favorite TED Talk on this one, which is the Dan Pallotta TED Talk. I think I've sent you that one.
Yes.
Right. Where he talks about dreaming in the dimension of our being, dreaming in the dimension of our humanity, because we have been dreaming in the dimensions of technology and physical creation and business and politic, et cetera. But we have, in his thinking, neglected to dream in the dimension of our being, at least to dream to the level and extent, the fantastic extent we think of impossible things and then accomplish them, right, in the physical world. But we really don't spend time thinking about the impossible things and then accomplishing them in the dimension of our humanity, in the dimension of our connection to others, in the dimension of what it truly means to be a conscious, sentient, emotional being walking on a planet, right? There's a lot there that we just haven't really taken time to explore. And to me, that's purpose. I find great attraction to that activity relative to purpose in my own life. And I mean, there's so much to unpack with that, but I'll just have to leave that as the top level summary there.
And do you feel like you are living according to that purpose currently, or are there things that are on your roadmap still that you feel like will help you achieve that purpose?
I find that I am more and more aligned over time. I think about sort of that vision that I just laid out for purpose, and then like in the Venn diagram, and then like how you spend the hours of your day, Colt. And I do find that, my work is more and more getting focused on helping businesses get aligned around purpose. And then this is actually a key part of that. How do you create great alignment between the purpose of an organization and the purposes of the people within it? And I find that to be very rewarding work. It's definitely aligned, right? We're moving away from just the pure dimension of how do we create a business that's profitable. I think we've looked at that question. We've answered that question. We've had organizations just knock that out of the park. Great. Good job. Let's talk about what's next. What else can we create? We can create organizations and businesses that are, yes, profitable. We've learned that formula, but now how do we make them more? How do we make them rewarding for people, fulfilling for people, connective for people, and engines for people to find their own process of growth and elevation, right? I think that's a beautiful question to explore. In my personal time, creating connections with things like the men's group thing that I've been doing, time to share in community. I'm always much more inclined to, go have a lunch or glass of beer with somebody that I am heading out to the nightclub where you can't relate in those same ways. But I always see more opportunity to better align and better express that purpose in the art form of my life.
Yeah. I think that what you're describing is a key element to why you and I have such a close relationship. In that you have a very purpose-driven approach to business. So as you were describing it, you were saying, how can this business have more purpose? And I think my approach is, how can the people inside of that business behave in such a way that they are uplifting others and allowing all individuals find their own purpose? And I think those two things just have such a nice overlap, right? It clicks. And you really, one without the other would get some result, but the two of things together, I think, are so powerful. Because both of us are, we're capitalists at heart, right? We're business people. We believe in a capitalist system, but at the same time, not necessarily at the expense of the things that we hold dear. And I think that what we have loved exploring is, how do we take these things and do it all? Whereas our culture kind of teaches us that you have to choose, right? You're either this or that. You're either business minded or you're compassionate. You're either data driven or you're emotional. And I personally believe that we can be all of those things. It takes work and it takes discipline and it takes
Yeah.
open-mindedness and all of those things, but I don't think we should have to choose.
I share your thinking. I think to a degree, we've stagnated in terms of the development, of ourselves as beings. I think, we came up with an education system. We've kind of been locked into it for a while, and we've sort of explored the extremes of what's possible in the space of business. And it's great. I mean, I'm all for it. But then now let's figure out what's next. Let's not just find how do we get to the first trillionaire? I'm not amused. Is anybody interested in that? I mean, maybe the person who has the potential to be that, but in the collective of humanity as a whole, that's not compelling to me. There's so many other dimensions that I think now warrant our attention that are much more interesting to me. And if you think about just the only way to get a trillionaire is to have so many other people have less. Let's look at how can we collectively elevate, I think is just a much more compelling approach.
Well, I want to take us back to the TED Talk that we were talking about earlier, the lies our culture tells us about what matters.
Yeah.
And he starts off talking about loneliness and how one of the biggest lies, he talks about 3 different lies. And one of them is that he can make himself happy, and how he was so focused on work that he neglected relationships and all of these things. And I do believe that strongly. I believe that we are hardwired to live in a community. We are hardwired to seek love and love others, whether that is a romantic love or a friendship love or, agape love, whatever those things are. And I think that it is in our DNA to live as a community. And right now we're fighting that.
Wow, right.
And we can talk about that another topic. But I think that sense of community is a core element of purpose. And, how are you relating to those around you is a core component of purpose. And he said something, and I wrote it down when he said it because I believe so strongly in these words. He said, everybody has a life, right? Everybody has life experiences, and almost everyone that everyone goes through a valley. And through those life experiences, you can either be broken or you can be broken open. And he talks about the experience of being broken open and how it creates this mind openness, I guess is the right word, or mindset, I suppose, where you then start to see that I can't live in that bitterness. I can't live with that anger. That all that's doing is harming me. And when you start to think about other people versus yourself, and he also says joy is the dissolving of self. I think all of these concepts are so important when we talk about purpose.
Oh, I'm absolutely with you. I think that there is, I would almost say a step that has to come first, which we largely tend to ignore in certainly in public education and our popular discourse. There are elements to our being that we sort of disregard. As you were saying, I think we're social, right? Mm-hmm. We're social beings. We're tribal. We're a community. We are. There's these aspects of who we are in our natural state that I think kind of just don't get acknowledged in our conversations, and generally aren't considered when we set about this activity of what's my purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's because we think that we're disinclined to accept any kind of limitations on absolute freedom for how to create about who we are and what drives us. And we'd rather not think that there's certain things about us that we just need, and maybe we're not getting, or don't fit well into the kind of the popular viewpoints of how a really successful person needs to be absolutely independent, self-made, etc. It's well, maybe that's not healthy. And I'm starting to wonder about how many, let's call them psychological conditions, are really just healthy human behaviors inside an unhealthy context manifesting, right? So I wonder about that stuff a lot.
Well, I mean, I think what we're touching on is why when I did that talk back in the spring and I talked about the concept of personal board of directors, it was the topic that almost everyone asked questions about.
Yes.
because clearly it resonated with that audience to say, I don't have a personal board of directors. I don't have people I could call and ask questions to and run ideas by and lean on when I need something. So the fact that, I did one talk and the audience was so touched by that concept tells me that I was touching their loneliness, right? I was
Yeah, that's right.
touching their sense of independence, and I was questioning that. I was causing
Right.
them to question that. Your sense of independence isn't necessarily a healthy thing, which is what you're talking about.
It is. And it's like you see it a lot. And we have these stories that get told around very successful people where we're really celebrating their independence. We're holding it up as heroic, really.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I don't think that it's true. I don't think that any quote unquote self-made individual is truly self-made. I think that anytime you really peel the onion on those stories, you find that that's not the case. But I don't think that that's bad news. I think that that's really good news. Like, let's look at and be honest about what it takes, what a healthy process looks like, what a healthy human is made up of. And it should be, I hope that we learn that it is an amalgam. It is a community, and that we maybe can sort of move away from this idolization of everybody standing up as their own island.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I think that we have long ago accepted the premise that an executive team of a healthy organization has diversity,
Yep.
has diversity of thought, has
Right.
diversity of experience, has different skills, different, disc assessment, different Enneagram personalities, all of those things, right? That creates that healthy executive team in a company. I don't understand why we haven't made the leap to think that we as people would benefit from that same level of diversity.
Totally. I have a question here. I'm going to two-step my way into this.
Now, boy.
So there was so much talk about mindfulness for a period of time, and I think that it's still in the sort of common dialogue. But what was funny to me as I observed this idea of mindfulness sort of got used as a way to get more productivity out of people. I mean, it really just sort of got co-opted into the engine of more productivity somehow, and I feel like that was so disconnected from what its intent was initially. So, speaking on purpose, it does seem to me that there are circumstances that I observe where purpose has really gotten hijacked. Right, this idea of someone's purpose could be their family. I'm just 100% committed to the support of my family, and then as you were asking, I think you asked me, like, well, what do the hours of your day look like, Colt? Right. And you can find that a person who is mentally or even verbally committed to my family is my purpose will spend, the 8, 10, 12-hour day working for, a corporation, et cetera, that their family, it's not a family owned business, right? It's like, so the phrase I used a moment ago was purpose getting hijacked. Do you see it that way? Or am I thinking about this what do you think?
I think I don't know that I would have ever used the word hijack, but I think I would. What's coming up for me as you talk about that is the 7 Habits book, Stephen Covey, right? Classic.
Yep, sure.
I recommend it all the time. And the concept of basically the theory of the 7 Habits book is that the effective people are reconciling their big rocks with their little rocks, right? We all know the adage of the professor puts the
Right.
sand and the gravel in the water, right? We
Right.
all know that story.
Yes.
And so the principle of the 7 habits is for you to really live an effective life, your small decisions have to support your big decisions. And you have to reinforce and reconcile those things all the time. Now, you could say, my purpose is my family. And on the flip side of that, you can't only just wake up every day and take care of your family. You have to have means in order to do that, right? We all need resources and all of those things. So there is a balance. But what I love about the 7 Habits book, and it comes with a workbook, is it really helps you identify where are your gaps in what you say you want, and then the decisions that you are making. I mean, very easy, classic example. I want to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to eat fried food and cheesecake all the time, right? Like that is not, those two things don't reconcile. We've all been there. We've all, existentially wanted to lose a few pounds. And then we make small decisions every meal, every day that don't support that. So the 7 Habits book really helps you reconcile that. And I think it's interesting to me because when I've done these, I used to do these workshops and I would do these little cohorts with, like 6 people max. And we would go through the workbook and all that stuff. And people typically focused on their smaller decisions. They would say, I want fill in the blank. And I'm making these decisions that don't support fill in the blank. But what I found to be some of the most moving conversations is when you really started to question, well, if these are the small decisions that you're making, are you sure this big thing is what you really want? And maybe you should start by questioning that. Why do you want that? Is that truly what you want? Or is that what you've been taught that you want? Is that, whatever those things, is that what society pressures you to want? And so I think what you're describing is kind of the same thing. Maybe it's purpose hijacking, but for me, it's just that reconciliation of our words and our actions.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really with you on that. So 2 things happening for me in that is, one, this idea of making decisions. To me, that sounds like a very engaged act, a very conscious act, making decisions, right? That throughout the day, there's thousands of actions that we take. And I would attribute dozens of them, in my mind, having correlated with making a decision, right? Like in sort of this formal sense. And the rest of them, though, probably some micro decision that like precedes them. They're at such a micro level that they're like not even conscious, really, right? So that was the first thing. The second thing was this idea of why is that the purpose, right? This was this exercise of asking more, but I think we're probably going to get to that in the action section. So
yeah,
micro decisions, actual decisions, like what can you tell me about that? Because I have a feeling that most of the things that I do throughout the day, like I'm in the like 90% range, I haven't had any exercise of decision making associated with them.
Well, they're habits. And so if you really do some of your research and reading, and I got really nerdy on the concept of habits a few years ago. And our brain is a muscle, just like anything else. And it is designed to conserve energy. And so what you're describing is as an unconscious act is your brain going into that reactive habit, low energy mode where you're just doing what you've always done.
Yep.
It's thinking in the way that it's always thought, right? It's conserving energy. And it's very difficult. It takes a lot of energy to create new neural pathways in your brain. And what I'm thinking of is the kind of going back to the last episode with Rob and how I would come home in those early days of that mentor-mentee relationship where every day he was giving me feedback on my behavior, the mental exhaustion I had at the end of those days to just think about behavior, think about myself every minute of every day in a way I never had before.
Yeah.
So again, these are all things about, being uncomfortable, if that's the way you want to describe it, or really just maybe being intentional and recognizing why am I behaving this way? And I want to have a new habit. Therefore, I have to go down the path of creating a new neural pathway so that my habit now becomes the thing that supports my purpose.
I love this. So like, I think about, we were talking about sequentially earlier to go through the exercises, some of them we talked about, to really kind of feel into purpose, right? What do you find rewarding, right? Mm-hmm. Where do you see your resistance and fear? So those things. And then once you have gotten clarity on that, then you can start to describe, well, what would the habits of a person aiming in that direction or driven by that purpose look like? Then there's work. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. BJ Fogg. I mean, this guy's work is on the building and rewiring of habits. He has a few books out now. He's based out of Berkeley. I actually had him come and do a talk for one of my companies, and it was like, wow, that's very significant. So he helps businesses that are trying to create new habits in consumer behavior but also helps individuals trying to create new habits in personal behavior. So it's like, this is interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to kind of tie all these things back together.
Yeah.
When I think about the 7 Habits book, my personal favorite habit is seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Sure.
And I had a terrible habit of interrupting people. I think we talked about when Rob was on about how I would come into the meetings already with the idea of how to solve whatever problem it was.
Yep.
And the energy that it took to stop that habit was exhausting.
Yeah.
Exhausting. I cannot tell you how difficult it was to listen, to be an active listener versus just waiting to talk, to allow space for other people to express themselves, to be patient when they did not speak as efficiently as I would like them to speak. But what I learned from all of that exercise again goes back to that purpose, as I was changing my behaviors, as I was growing new neural pathways in how I interacted with people, I was building trust. I was helping them feel valued. I was accepting them for who they were instead of trying to make them more like me. All of those things that ultimately became very important to me.
Yeah.
Now, I still get tired. And when I get tired, my lizard brain takes over and I'm prone to be like, hey, can you speed it up? Like I gotta, but I do it less and less and less as I continue to grow that skill.
And I must presume less and less and less because you have been driven by the rewarding experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you're getting close to this intersection point, the crossover point rather, between the role that purpose plays in a personal life and the role that purpose plays in business. And I'm excited because our next episode will be focusing on the role that purpose plays in business. I'm hoping, I'm not going to put him on the spot by saying his name now because I'm still having an email exchange about this. I'm hoping to bring on an individual whom I deeply respect as a very purpose-driven business leader. Hoping to have him on as a guest with us next week. But that will be our focus for our next podcast episode. But before we close, of course, we do want to talk about actions, right? We're always action-driven. Actions recommended last time were from Rob, actually. He suggested, look in the mirror and list the 3 most important things that you want to achieve, accomplish, or become, and then throw out number 2 and 3. So basically just what's the most important thing? Did you find an answer to that?
I did. I think this is, again, very situational and timing is important. I did do that. My personal purpose at this moment is to find my next investment of time, right? Whether that is through employment or growing my own company or whatever it is that I'm going to do next. So that is top of mind. And then, obviously below that these are all the things that are important to me in the pursuit of that. But I did do that. And I mean, you could ask me that 2 months from now and I will have a different answer. But
yes.
That is what is top of mind for me at this moment. Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's such an important exercise. The likelihood that it relates to your purpose, I'm sure, very high. And then you start asking the questions. Okay, well, if that's what I'm aiming at, what are the habits? What are the actions? What are the conversations? Who are the board members? Right? Once you take the moment to have that personal exchange in the mirror, what is the most important thing for me? Then you can start to come up with a plan. I think until you undertake an exercise like that, much of your energy is sort of lost as heat or friction.
Yeah. And I would say my suggested action for this week is to look in the mirror, do the same thing that you did with Rob, and then ask yourself, why? Why do I want that 3 to 5 times, right? There's the concept of the 3 whys or the 5 whys to get to the root cause of why is this your purpose, and make sure that you're not just following societal rules around what we should want out of life. That would be my recommended next week's action.
Yeah, I totally share your thinking. That's an excellent action to take. My guidance on that, from my own opinion, is that you have asked why, or so that, which is the phrase that I use in this process, enough times. When you find that your answer is no longer reducible, it's an irreducible answer, right? That it's like, you've arrived at a statement that you would just repeat if somebody said so that or why. It'd be, well, that's it. That's the bottom of it. So seek to find the irreducible why when you're going through that process.
And did you do this exercise, Rob's action, last time?
I did. What came up for me was I'm seeking a state that I'll just use the one word, the state of enoughness. And I don't think that that's a matter of accumulating enough things. I think that's a matter of deciding that what you have is enough in any space of life, right? Because I believe that dreaming, acting, creating from a foundation of enoughness is the most empowered foundation to act from.
That's amazing. I love it.
Right on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're probably getting close on time, maybe a little long. We were long-winded this episode, but it was very rich. Great dialogue. I enjoyed the conversation a great deal.
Likewise. All right. Well, then we'll wait till next time. This is good stuff.
All right. Well, if again, YouTube channel, please check us out. If you have thoughts, comments, questions, suggested topics or guests, please let us know. And thank you so much for listening.
Yeah. All right. Thanks all.